Okay, so now that I hope everyone's comfortable and listening to this in a language that they're comfortable with, it gives me great pleasure now to introduce Dr. Ann Lee, who is the chairperson and a founding member of the Persatuan Penulis Berbilang Bahasa Malaysia, or PEN Malaysia. In fact, we wouldn't even exist but for her dogged determination to make sure that we did. So that's, that's kind of person, tells you a little bit about the kind of person she is. She was born in Tawau. She's an award-winning playwright and an academic. She is the founder of possibly Malaysia's first and only all-women theatre group, Qualiworks, and has taught cinema and society in Southeast Asia at the Open University Malaysia, and has written reviews for regional news, cultural resources for the last 25 years. She was also a news presenter for a brief period of time where she graced our TV screens virtually every night and gave us happy news. And on that note, I am going to hand over to Anne, who is killing me now. And I should add also, she's really awesome to go on road trips with. So there you go, Anne. Over to you.
Okay, Sheen, I thought you were just going to cut to the chase. Okay, thank you for that intro, and really thank you to everybody for being here. We have about 50 or 60 people registered, so thank you all for being here, and I imagine people will kind of come in as and when. Welcome everyone. As Sheen said, we're at least 4 different time zones. And this is our inaugural kind of international event, so we're really very happy. Thank you all for being here. Our accomplished authors, Zen Ho, Shankari, Chandran, and Melissa Niño. Let me also mention those from PEN International Women Writers Committee, the president, Zoe Rodriguez, who's actually from PEN Sydney, and Judith Hill from PEN San Miguel de Allende. Judith was a person who kind of put us in touch with other PEN centers in the first place. And we're very happy to support Know Her Words, to really make it something, to give it life, because I think it's quite a tough process, as I will mention, to get to 10. But we really want to support it and make it something more than it might necessarily be for some. So, but having got to this point, please bear with me. I'd like to thank the team. Nadira Ilana is our head of the Women Writers Committee. She's a writer and filmmaker, and she led the judging process and the whole project. She's actually now editing her first feature film. Hana Nadira, actor, producer, writing her first play, actually, and she really has been instrumental in putting this event together. And of course, our writer, playwright, translator, interpreter right now, Adriana Nordin Manan, who, as Sheen said, just won an award for her first play, a prestigious award. So Sandee, who I don't know if any of you see, but she's got a big capital tech there. She's also an actor and producer and writer, technical whiz in this case. And finally, my friend, also writer and playwright, Sheena Gurbakhash, who will be our moderator for this conversation. So basically, on behalf of Nadira, I will present our 10 books and explain a little bit about how we got to there, and then I'll pass over to Sheena. So writing in the vernacular, mengarang dalam lidah tempatan, which is in our national language. Now, from Nadira, who isn't here, basically the history of this is that the committee voted for 6 languages, for the books to come from 6 languages. Now, the whole process of selecting a top 10 list is kind of crazy, especially because you're talking about approximately at least 140 languages that are spoken every day in Malaysia. This at least is according to Professor Emerita Asma Haji Omar. And those 6 languages, Bahasa Melayu or Malay, Chinese, English, Iban, and Kadazan or Dusun, depending on what was depending on the range of books, and Tamil. It was decided, I got voted that no academic writing was going to make the list. And basically it took 6 months to get to this because given people's facility in language, it's true to say, I think that most Malaysians are at least bilingual. And in this case, though, for a kind of nuanced understanding of books, we sourced committee members of the public, i.e. from our socials, Facebook, IG, and X, and academics. And the list is a first because that usually the lists come out in one language, and it's usually the national language or other lists in English, for example. Now, it's something to note that we have strong oral traditions. I mean, I think everybody does, but in Malaysia, our sort of native peoples or indigenous orang asal come from pre-literate societies. And actually only 30% of orang asli have completed secondary school. And this is because of difficulties that they face. So going just by printed books or by comics and so on, these are part of the limitations. The Kadazan Dusun, for example, in Sabah, this is a matrifocal society, and part of the main role that they have is keepers of indigenous verses. That's a translation of what it is. So where we could, we're also looking at books written by women of their respective communities that portray their worldview, a kind of auto-ethnography, if you like. But we have a national language, and that's Bahasa Melayu or Bahasa Malaysia. And this is just an example of how we have used both Chinese and Tamil in our communications around both this event and what Know Her Words is, because it's quite something to explain. Now I go to our 10 books. The first 5 the first one is Black Water Sister by Zen Cho, published by Pan Macmillan. This is fantasy. Now, please, the list, how you get to the list will be shown in the chat. So please have a look closer. I'm sorry about the quality of some of this imagery here. Second, and interestingly enough, we were asked to give the books in the book titles in kind of alphabetical order. So this is the best. I mean, given whose alphabet, well, we had a majority of English, so we went with that. The Girl and the Ghost by Hana Alkaf, published by HarperCollins and Blackstone Publishing. This is young adult fiction. And the cover here, which is Iban Dream, which is part of a trilogy, actually, by Golda Mo, published by Monsoon Books. And this is also fantasy. And we have, kami pun ada hak bersekolah, or we too have the right to schooling. Now, this is an anthology of 18 Orang Asli writers, young writers. The full list of all of them is on our link. But for example, that includes Aziz Suzana, anak perempuan or AP Ibrahim, Diana AP Kampak Ching, Nabila binti Aris, Siti Fida, anak perempuan Tan Kok Tau, and Zafira Rosa AP Asun. And the 5th book is The Kampung Legacy, a journal of North Borneo's traditional baskets by Jennifer P. Lingi, who I notice is here today. So special welcome to Jennifer. Self-published, and this is non-fiction. We put this as under non-fiction and anthropology. But all 10, this is all 10. Kunang Pesisir Morton, Fireflies by Morton's Coast by Raiha Bahaudin, published by New Book Press, and this is fiction. Oh, sorry. My 7th is Dari Awas ke Regiment ke-10, From Awas to the 10th Regiment by Shamsia Fakih, published by SIRD, and this is memoir. And then My Mother Patu by Saras Manikam, who is also present with us. Thank you. Wonderful to have you here, Saras. This book is published by Penguin Southeast Asia, and this is an anthology of short stories. This is under fiction as well. And then we have Thayaga Vendum, The Desire to Become a Mother by S.P. Bama, published by Uma Publishing House, also fiction. And last we have Tui by Ho Sok Fong, published by Mentor Publishing. And this is also fiction. This is historical fiction. So those are our 10 books. We're really proud of them. We think that in terms of a discussion around why these books, I think that's something that we look forward to have, and we've had some of it. Brickbats and bouquets, maybe we can expect, but we're very, very proud to have come to this list, and thankful as 6 months and let it be out there for more to discuss about. Okay, that's it. Thank you very much, and I pass you back to Sheena. Thank you, Sheena.
Okay, yeah, so thank you for that, Anne, and for being so concise, because I know we've talked so much about this list, and you know, all the nitty-gritty of actually drilling down to those 10 books. I'd now like to, I think we should now get to our speakers, so our authors, and I would like to now introduce them. From PEN Guadalajara, I would like to introduce Doctora Niño, Melissa Niño from PEN Guadalajara. Melissa has a degree in Hispanic literature, a master's degree in applied linguistics. Okay, she is the author of several books of poetry, including The Dorsal Atlántica, Documente sobre los suelos oceanos, and La Impreso El Rojo de mi Corazón Gravita. Both have been published by Espina Dorsal in 2022 and 23 respectively. Among the distinctions she has received are the Il Hugo Guterres Vega Literature Prize in 2018, the Letras Saladas in 2019, and the Spanish contest Voces Nuevas in 2020. Most recently, she has been awarded the Poet in Development Award by the Jalisco State Poetry Forum. She likes lemons, I'm told, toy boats, spending time on her terrace, and the loves of her life are her dogs, her partner, and sunsets, not probably in that order. Next, I would like to invite to introduce Shankari Chandran. Shankari is a Tamil Australian novelist and lawyer. Her first novel, Song of the Sun God, was published in Sri Lanka and then in Australia, where it was, so it's been shortlisted for the Sri Lankan National Literary Award in 2018, and it was longlisted for the International Dublin Literary Award in 2019 and is currently being adapted for TV. So we hope to see that on our screens soon. Her second novel, which is on the Know Her Words list for PEN Sydney, Chai Time in Cinnamon Gardens, won the Miles Franklin Literary Award in 2023. Her short stories have been published in critically acclaimed anthologies, Another Australia and Sweatshop Women, Volume 2 by Affirm Press and Sweatshop, and she is the Deputy Chair of Writing New South Wales. Her latest novel, Safe Haven, was published in May this year by Ultimo Press. She has also spent two decades working as a lawyer. Are you still a lawyer, by the way, Shankari? Yes,
I am.
Still a lawyer. Okay. She's based in Sydney, Australia, where she lives with a husband and 4 children. I don't know how you find time to do all this and still write so wonderfully, because as a result of this this event, I actually went and looked for Shankari's work, and I'm now thoroughly enjoying her book, which name has gone out of my head because these things happen. The one about the sun god, which was
they usually happen in public, Sheena.
Yes, always.
Song of the Sun God.
Yes, Song of the Sun God. It is a wonderful novel, and I can't wait to get down to reading Chai Time and Cinnamon Gardens as well. Zen Cho is one of my favorite writers. I've been reading her for decades, years. So I'm really thrilled that you're on here, Zen, because your writing has truly changed the way I looked at many things. She was born and raised here in Malaysia. She lives in the UK. She writes romance and fantasy. Her titles include Sorcerer to the Crown and the Malaysian contemporary fantasy Blackwater Sister, which is what is on the PEN Malaysia Know Her Words list. That one, yes. She has won numerous awards, including the Hugo, the Crawford, Malaysian Fantasy Awards, and the LA Times Ray Bradbury Prize, as well as being a finalist for, and I really like the name of this award, Fantasy Ignite Locus Astounding Kitsch's and Diverse Book Awards. Her short fiction has been translated into French, Spanish, Italian, Finnish, Chinese, and Japanese. And when she isn't writing, Zen works as a lawyer. She enjoys cooking, baking, reading, gossip, and travel. And she's back with us here in Malaysia at the moment to launch her new novel, which is a romance novel. And Zen, you could talk a little bit about that later on. So here we are. Let's get to the important reason that you're all here, which is not to hear me talk, but to talk about what writing in the vernacular means. So when we came up with this topic of writing in the vernacular, the reason we chose it was partly because of Blackwater Sister, which is an awesome amalgamation of local, very local, very personal experiences, which writing them in English, then you did it so well. You melded it together so well, and there was no disconnect of now I'm reading this, but that. So when we looked up the word vernacular, we found that it actually comes from the Latin verna, which means homebound, homeborn, or slave. And it's really what's left when you take away the dominant, the authoritative, the official. The vernacular is very domestic. It's non-binary, and we're looking to explore, the spaces in between, which the vernacular allows us to do. So, can we start by just talking a little bit about your work that's been featured on the PEN list, Know Her Words, on your PEN Know Her Words list, and what led you to it? So who do we start with? Don't put up all your hands at the same time.
Well, shall I give it a go and then
Yes,
we can leave?
yes.
Yeah, thank you
you.
so much, Sheena. Yeah, so Blackwater Sister, for those who haven't read it, is a contemporary fantasy, as Sheena said, set in Malaysia. It's about a young woman called Jess, who's grown up in America, so she's basically Asian American. And at the beginning of the book, she is moving back to Malaysia. Her parents have been through some reversals of fortune, and they head back to Malaysia for the kind of family support and so on. But she's never lived in Malaysia since she was a toddler, so she's under some stress. She's just graduated from university. She's feeling a bit, she's not really sure about her aim in life. She's quite stressed about what's happening to her family, and she's also closeted. So she's got a girlfriend, but she's not telling her parents because she feels they already have a lot on their plate, and she knows they would not take it well. And amid all that, she starts hearing a voice in her head, and the voice in her head turns out to belong to her estranged grandmother, Ama, which is in Hokkien, just means grandmother in Hokkien. And her grandmother has very strong ideas actually about what Jess should do in her life, and turns out to have been a spirit medium for the goddess, a kind of mysterious goddess called the Blackwater Sister, and is trying to save the Blackwater Sisters temple from development. And so Jess then gets drawn into these kind of battles with I describe the book as being about gods, ghosts, gangsters, and grandmas. And yes, and so I I use Jess as a kind of insider outsider figure. That's the kind that's just so useful as a point of view character in fiction. Um, and I actually left Malaysia. I grew up in Malaysia, but I left Malaysia around age 17, 18 to go study in UK. And then like I planned to come back, but then I kind of like got together with a local and then I didn't come back. So I do come back annually actually, but I live in the UK. And I think, in a way, I write about Malaysia as a way to continue to be present here, as a way to kind of explain my childhood to myself and explain the world to myself, all these things that never really made sense to me growing up. And I also use this kind of I use Jess because like Jess is like she know in some ways she's more blur than me because I grew up here and she grew up in the US, and so she's kind of encountering Malaysia almost as a foreign country, but one that is like strangely familiar, right? Um, but she's also like less blur than me because I give her a greater facility with particularly the dialect Hokkien than I do. So I have her parents speak to her in Hokkien and she kind of speaks back. And actually language is a big thing in the novel where when she starts getting possessed by her grandmother essentially, and she finds that her language is remarkably improved, which is kind of a dream of mine. If only I could just magically have a facility in all the major languages of Malaysia. Like I would particularly love to be fluent in Tamil, you know. Um, and I'd love to be fluent in Mandarin. I have really bad Mandarin and all this kind of thing. So I think fantasy is really useful for that because you can kind of access these histories. And I'm going to bring it back to the vernacular. The vernacular is the kind of role it plays in the novel is that just Jess herself speaks American English, which I had to work quite hard at because I lived in the States for a couple of years when I was young, but I don't speak American English myself. So I did actually send it to an American friend and say, can you please like Mary pick this? Can you check that like I'm not using any Anglicisms, Briticisms, Malaysianisms, you know? And she did pick up on a couple of things, which I hadn't realized were specific to British English. But the dialogue that people get struck by is actually Jess's Malaysian relatives and friends and acquaintances and so on, because they speak kind of primarily Manglish, even the ones in the book, like, often people are speaking Hokkien or Malay, but I just write it in English. I write it in Malaysian English, which uses kind of a lot of loan words from Malay, some from Tamil, some from, the different Chinese dialects. And people often get struck by that, I suppose, because it's slightly unusual. It is published by Pan Macmillan. It's kind of published, they say, internationally out of these kind of metropoles, like these centers of New York and London, and yeah, so I suppose in that sense it's striking, and I do find it slightly funny because people comment on that, but actually it was a lot less effort for me because that's the language I speak with my parents, it's the language I think in, whereas
Then
American English was difficult.
you
Yeah,
need to slow down a little bit because Adriana's having problems keeping up with the translation.
sorry, I always
Yeah.
talk really fast. Okay, I thought that was me.
Okay, all right. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, I
But
was like, I need to shut up and let I want to hear from the others.
hardly. Okay, Melissa, what about you?
Okay, well, we are moving on from novels into poetry, which makes a big difference. But a couple of things do resonate with the process of writing the book that is my book that is listed on the Know Her Words list from Guadalajara. And basically it's that when I wrote it, I tried for it to convey my Mexican identity. And I mean, this sounds like really simple, but you gotta know that this collection was inspired by a special mission. So how can you mix, being local when you're talking about the universe, about exploration? But that is one of the motivations behind my writing, actually. And I think it's very related to the notion of vernacular. I'm particularly talking about a certain critique in resistance to be erased in this very I don't know, personal way of expressing myself, just because I need to reach a broader audience. In poetry, actually, for me, it's it goes on the other way. I'm always like pushing for for editors to let me throw in these word choices or these this way of phrasing my expressions that are not the standard, and this is where I get to connect my poetry with vernacular. I don't write in a native language from Mexico because colonization. I lost it. I didn't have that. I couldn't. That opportunity was taken away from me. My great grandfather might have been a Nahuatl speaker, but we lost it due to migration and all these modernization processes, you know. I lost it. So, but what I haven't lost it, and what I'm pushing at when writing my poetry is for these more situated choices to be heard through these through my writings. And I don't know, I think poetry gives me this freedom to expand on this part. And well, the big how do you say it in English, the big difficulty was grounding it, like, because how can you make all these devices and machinery that are flying in outer space to speak in a certain voice or even dialect of the Spanish, and that's so. And I started from the end, so I'm moving towards the beginning, just for you to get to know a little bit more about the book. It's independent poetry, which is very important. I think Ruth is going to talk to us about it a little bit more, but I do want to underline that it is the independent publishing houses, the ones that are publishing, that are ones that are supporting women poetry, at least within yeah, I think I can speak nationwide within Mexico. And well, I don't know. How about you, Shankari? How?
Thank you, Melissa. Firstly, thank you, Sheena and PEN, for having me. And I'm coming to you from the country of the Garamaragal people and the Daramaragal people, our First Nations people, and I pay my respects to their elders and to their storytellers. So much of what you've said, both of you, really resonates and connects with me. You know, Zen, we have the same culture and tradition of storytelling where we are weaving ancestors and the dead and our gods and goddesses into our daily lives, right? As much a part of our daily lives as the roasting of coriander and cumin. And for me, Melissa, I really felt it when you said writing as resistance to being erased. Because that is very much the Sri Lankan Tamil experience, and it's so much a part of the words that we choose and the stories that we choose to tell, and that grief, which I think we'll come on to later, about the loss of language through dispossession and through colonization. So I feel connected to you already through the vernacular and through our stories. So thank you so much for that.
I think Shankari's video got frozen. Might be
Yeah,
her mic.
audio as well, though.
Okay, I think it was a universal hang. Shankari, are you able to rejoin us?
Back again.
Okay.
Back again.
She's
Thank
got
you,
it.
darling. Thank you, my sweetheart. My son brought me some milk.
Enough?
And so it's yes, so it sort of flashes back from contemporary Australia to Sri Lanka and their ancestral homeland during the Civil War. The novel is about the stories that the residents and the staff tell themselves and tell each other to keep their memories and their culture alive and to stem that erasure through colonization, through migration, and through aging. And it celebrates the way that we build communities in our new homelands, but also the ways that we use story to hold on to our old ones. And so in many ways, Chai Time at Cinnamon Gardens is my love letter to storytelling. It's about what it means to be Australian as a migrant, and who gets to decide what it means to be Australian, who gets to decide identity to the inclusion of some and the exclusion of others. And what took me to the story was that in Australia, it is so hard to talk about race, racism, and identity. And I don't think that this is dissimilar from other countries. I think this is a shared experience, that we have a certain fragility around discussions of colonization and the impact of it, and the way that that positions race and racism, and how we feel, what our relationship is, even just to honest and respectful and loving conversation. And I've struggled with that. We as a society have struggled with that our whole life. And I figured that my publishing career in Australia was over after my third novel, or my second published novel. My third manuscript couldn't find a publisher. So I thought, well, I'm done now publishing in Australia. It's never going to happen for me. And that's okay. I had to sort of go on my own grief journey. But I thought, I'm going to write this novel now then about race, racism, and identity, because I feel confident and courageous to do it. And at the same time, I'm confident that it'll never get published in Australia, so it'll never be read. And therefore, let me write and speak honestly with candor and say what I really think and feel. And of course, then fortunately / unfortunately, the book got published and has gone on to, to be a part of what I hope will be an ongoing conversation. I hope it is part of a conversation that we can have in a more respectful and loving manner. So that's sort of how I came to write it and what it's about. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Shankari. Thank you, everybody. Actually, you've spun this conversation up into all kinds of different directions. Let's talk a little bit about language. The language and I think all of you have touched on colonization as well, and the impact that colonization has all had on all our languages. I think I read somewhere once that language is the first thing that goes when you're a migrant, or the first thing that goes is language. The last thing that goes, the thing that stays is food. People could, that's the one thing people hang on to, but language disappears very quickly for a variety of reasons. So maybe we can, and all of us here are from countries that have had a history of colonization. And so there's been suppression, marginalization, imposition of language and culture. And you've all talked a little bit about how that, can we expand a little bit on how that has impacted how you live and communicate in your work, or even outside your work? Melissa, do you want to take that first?
Okay.
Yeah, yeah, because you already said just now that you no longer speak any of the native languages that are part of your heritage. But can you reclaim them in some way?
Oh, totally. I mean, in my case, this reclamation started through means of the academic, because it was my linguistic formation that started making me aware of the loss we had experienced in my family. Unfortunately, when I realized about this, my grandpa had already died. So I didn't have really no one to go back digging in the history of migration of my family. And so that's why I think it, but the curiosity at the beginning, and then the desire and the need of shedding some light into this aspect of our family was so big that it actually decided or marked my professional interest. And that's why I became a linguist, because I had the opportunity to involve in a project of reclamation in the south of Jalisco state, which is from where my grandpa and all of his ancestors were born. And it's really it's an ongoing battle even nowadays. Because I remember that when I started my interest in doing research on this topic, which was, I don't know, around 2010, even my own professors, they would question my interest. It was only one, Dr. Rosa Yanez, who really hurt us, and not only me, but a couple of other friends that we had interest in native languages. And that's how, and she invited us to these to be part of these field work. And that's it. That's how, it all happened like together, tracing my family's history together with my academic education. And it is until very recently that I could portray all these quests into my poetry. I am currently writing my third collection, and it's an autoethnography. It deals upon not only language, because as a linguist, I started writing about language. You will always find like a linguistic reflection in my poems. I can't get rid of it. But so I think it's going to be nice, this third take on the same topic, but from a more personal and vulnerable as well perspective.
Lovely.
I don't.
Okay, thank you. Zen or Shankari, do you want to?
I actually just wanted to ask Melissa, were you a poet or a linguist first?
Could you repeat that, please?
Were you a poet or a linguist first?
Oh my, you hit upon that button. No, I think I was a poet first. Yeah.
Okay. Shankari, what languages do you speak Tamil fluently or?
No. So Sheena, I do not speak Tamil fluently. And there are times, Tamil is a very proud language, right? Tamilians or Sri Lankan Tamils are very proud of the language. It's thousands of years old. And there are times when if I attempt to speak it, a speaker will say, please don't. So, and you know, it's a really, I'm touching my chest because it hurts to talk about language. When my parents migrated, Tamil in Sri Lanka was weaponized against them in the country. So when they migrated, they were very keen for us to integrate from a perspective of language, education, and employment, right? The typical sort of the migrant trifecta. And so they're trilingual. My parents are trilingual, but they didn't speak Tamil in the home. So we can understand Tamil very, very well, but not speak. And so I can't call the words to myself often, but I can understand the words if the words are in front of me. And I can often sense and feel meaning, but could never write it, for example. And I can particularly sense and feel meaning for familial emotions, right? Emotions between family, those intimate emotions are very much felt in Tamil for me. And so when I write, you know, I have this grief, Melissa, that we were talking about, that grief and loss about this language, because I am limited to the language of our colonizer. Now, we were, if you're Tamil, you will, in Sri Lanka, you believe you're colonized 1, 2, 3, 4 times. And I speak the language of our English colonizers, our British colonizers. And the country that is now my chosen home, the First Nations languages, there were more than 500 First Nations languages here. And those languages were criminalized and deliberately destroyed and erased. And there is, in some cases, this resurgence of First Nations languages. And so I'm sort of have this ancestral journey with language, and then this journey with language in my new country. And there are two impacts for me fundamentally. And one is, I think, I find it hard to describe, but it's really important for me to almost state the privilege of my positionality with language. So I write in English because my family was part of an educated middle class that left Sri Lanka before the war started, when you could see the war was coming, and before the war destroyed lives. And so we left with our lives intact. We migrated to the West. We were able to live safely. We were able to become more educated and provide more safety and stability and education and opportunity to our children. And that's a privilege in that kind of language control and in the writing that it then leads to. It gives me a sense of duty, and not in a sanctimonious way, right? You don't know me, but we'll hopefully get to know each other. As Hindus, duty is so, it's a good thing, and it's very much a part of the fabric of our life in Hinduism. And I feel that this privilege gave me a duty to speak to and to speak with Tamil people whose lives are different from my own, to speak with people, families, and communities, and to ask them if, you know, if they would like me to tell those stories. And so tell those stories in English that may hopefully be published in English with their permission. And, you know, I have worked with people in Sri Lanka, Tamil people, who will say to me essentially that in Sri Lanka, we are not allowed to tell the truth. We cannot tell the truth. And the truth is necessary and vital for reconciliation. And therefore, fiction is an important way of telling the truth, whether that be in English or in Tamil. The second part of this impact for me is that I am yearning for connection. And I'm yearning for this connection to people and to place. And I feel bereft of all the kinds of losses that we have suffered. And I am enraged by those injustices. And I'm proud of our culture, and I'm proud of our people. And I channel all of that into the way that I live as an Australian Tamil. And I'm often trying hard to maintain that connection to culture. So it's almost like our inherited and learned experience rather than our lived experience, because we're no longer living and immersed in it. So we're learning it from the diaspora instead of living it in the ancestral homeland. And it profoundly impacts what I write about, how I write, and the language that I use.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Shankari. Thank you for your honesty, your vulnerability, and thank you for sharing that with us. Zen, your Blackwater sister talks about, again, things that we don't talk about in polite circles. You know, the destruction of the environment, the transition from past to present, you know, from the destruction of the past, literally, the horrible high rises that go up all over the place before you blink your eye, and that tension between identity and modernity, in a sense. So, you know, how do you address, what language do you think in, and how does that play out?
I think in English. Yeah, I think in English. Like different kinds of English, like some literary, kind of more literary standard English. Because, you know, I grew up reading all these, like, I mean, same as everyone, all the Malaysians, I'm sure, who read in English for pleasure as children. I read Enid Blyton. I read Agatha Christie, you know, all these fellas. So I think in that kind of English, and I also think in like I also grew up online. I also think in like online English, which is often very Americanized, and I think in Manglish. One of the things that the discussion about language and vernacular was making me think of was one time when my mom was saying to me, "Oh, you know, it's so impressive, you know, like I don't know." She was having a little gloat, right? A little maternal gloat. She's like, "It's so impressive. My daughter is publishing all these books in English, and all the white people and all the Westerners are reading it, you know, and it's not even your native language." I was like, "It's my native language, what, Mom? I like speak English. It's my first language. I'm really not very great at any of the other languages." And she said, "No, your first language is Manglish. It's not English." And I was like, okay, you know, she got a point. Malaysian English, we call it Manglish. Um, but it's an interesting position to inhabit, right? Because, you know, so when you speak English, you're actually it's very class inflected in Malaysia. So to speak English as your primary language, you're probably of a certain class already, right? And it gives you then this access to, it's a very real form of privilege, you know, this access to a kind of powerful, the dominant global language at this present time, right? The language of the colonists, the language of the people who are in charge. And if you can speak it well, then that is a real advantage. And that is why my parents brought us up speaking English. It's very similar to Shankari's experience, except without the kind of war, which obviously is a big element of Shankari's experience. But with my family is perhaps a little bit more mundane. Basically, what happened, or at least how it was explained to me. My brother is actually attending, and he might have a different memory because we all have different memories of our childhood. But my father's side speaks Hakka. So you know, I'm getting into kind of different Chinese dialects now, and my mother's side speaks Hokkien. Now, the Hakka people, historically, Hakka means like guest people, and they kind of traveled around China. And so, what you'll find is a lot of Hakka people tend to speak multiple Chinese dialects. So my dad actually speaks 6 languages, if you count dialects as a dialect as a language, which many Chinese dialect speakers do say, because they're not mutually intelligible. Like if you're a Cantonese speaker, you will not understand Hakka or Hokkien. And then my mom's side spoke Hokkien. And my mom only spoke Hokkien and English and Malay. But therefore they had to make this decision where basically my mom wouldn't be able to understand Hakka, so they couldn't bring us up speaking Hakka. But if they tried to bring us up speaking Hokkien, that would probably have offended the Hakka speaking side of the family. So they settled in English. They both went to kind of convent schools or kind of mission schools. My dad went to St. Michael's in Ipoh, so he was taught, you know, English by these kind of English brothers and so on. And they also thought, practically speaking, that's going to give them a real advantage. And so they bring it back to Blackwater Sister. That was something I was thinking a lot about, because Jess is in this marginal position. She's like, you know, she kind of different from her environment. She's Asian American. She speaks English. She speaks some bad Hokkien. She doesn't speak the major languages, Malay in Malaysia. But at the same time, she's in a very privileged position. You know, she has this power of having an American accent, of having that kind of education. She went to Harvard. So actually, one of the lines that is most popular in social media when people read my book is a scene where basically Jess's dead grandmother is trying to turn her into a spirit medium for the gods, and Jess's mom finds out, and her mom says she can't be a spirit medium. She went to Harvard, which people find hilarious for some reason. But it's exactly the kind of thing, you know, your mom would say. It's like, I can't believe, like, you know, we invested to send her to this, you know, Ivy League, and they're trying to make her into a spirit medium. You know, it's not the kind of job we had in mind for her. But yeah, so there are actually kind of multiple scenes where she kind of encounters the fact that although she's in this marginal position, it's also quite a privileged position. And for example, the first time she encounters the Blackwater Sister, the goddess, it's on a construction site, you know, the construction site which is due to raise the goddess's temple. And there's a problem in the construction site because the goddess causing problems with the construction, which is not an unknown issue on construction sites in Malaysia. It's actually quite common for spirits to interfere. So my dad used to work in construction, and I kind of talked to him about it. But she turns up, and and there's a load of kind of she doesn't know this, but they are Bangladeshi workers, and there's a Chinese foreman, right? And so they are kind of arguing because the Bangladeshi workers don't want to go on, they don't want to go in the machinery because it's haunted, and people are getting in trouble. They don't want to die, obviously. And then Jess intervenes. She intervenes, and how she intervenes is to say, I'm from the company, I'm from the developer. And because she's got this fancy accent, she's clearly an English speaker, she's like, she kind of pulls it off. And she kind of does it in a way through the power of language, but through the kind the kind of ability to assume this very dominant, authoritative form of language.
Yes, awesome. Yes, I remember that. You can't be a spirit medium. We went to Harvard, I guess.
I feel like I know Jess's parents. Already.
We all know
Maybe next
Jess's
door.
parents. Some of us are Jess's parents, so but as fascinating as this is, I've got to pause you all here because I'm going to now welcome our next speaker, Ruth Escamilla Monroy from PEN Guadalajara. Ruth is a professor of language and literature. She won first place for a short story in the 25th National Literary Creation Contest of the Tec de Monterey. She is a language and literature teacher. She is a member of literary workshops and a contributor to magazines, radio, and other cultural projects. And her texts have appeared in various books and languages. In 2019, she published her first collection of poems, El La Puerta de la Lengua. Is that right? Did I say it right? Yes. And in 2022, she published her second collection, which is De Viajes e Extensias. Is that correct? Yes.
Inventario. Thanks.
She aspires to share her poetic vision of everyday events with the intention of establishing close contact. I have read Ruth's poetry on the PEN Guadalajara website, and it is lovely. So I would now like to welcome Ruth to this event, and for her to present the PEN Guadalajara list of Know Her Word writers. Thank you, Ruth.
Thank you very much. I'm excited to be here. Thanks a lot. I will share my screen. As Sheena said, my name is Ruth Escamilla Monroy. I'm glad to be here, and I'm honored to present PEN Guadalajara proposal. Okay, well, we are PEN Guadalajara, and we live in a book that loves books. In our city, Guadalajara, books matter. Since 1969, we have the Guadalajara Municipal Book Fair. And we also have Guadalajara International Book Fair since 1987. This is the most important publishing gathering in Ibero-America. And in 2022, we were selected as World Book Capital. And so you can see, we really love books. And there are many independent publishers in our city. And here you can see one of the members of our center holding an award from Guadalajara Municipal Book Fair. We are proud of her. Her name is Silvia Quesada, and we are happy to know that a woman writer was recognized this year. And when we received this beautiful invitation to share 10 excellent books, we decided to share authors from our city and our region, because we want you to know her work. So some members sent our proposal, and our secretary, Ruth Levy, shared it with the committee. And our proposal is confirmed this way. We offer 5 books of poetry, 1 book of children's poetry, 1 book of poetic prose, 1 novel, and 2 books composed by short stories. And this is remarkable to me because most of the books we put in our list were published by independent publishers, and which means that them are helping women to spread their words, and I'm thankful for that. We heard Melissa talking about that, and I'm glad to present this list. And I'm going to start with poetry. The first one is Recanto, Antología Personal, Recanto, Personal Anthology by Patricia Medina. And this book was published in 2006. Her poems are located in the territory of the female body and soul, inserted in a society that at first does not agree with her eruption by becoming owner of her words. She inaugurates a solitary and brave gap through which her powerful voice will travel. Patricia Medina is a fundamental writer thanks to her poetry and her activities as a guide for incipient authors. Also, she is an editor. We love her a lot here. Surprise Blood, Sangre Sorprendida by María Teresa Gutiérrez, who is connected here tonight. This book addresses the topic of death today in Mexico. There are 3 of the 4 parts that make up it are interwoven and dialogue with other literary voices such as indigenous poetry. This book was published in the same published house that the book of Melissa, Espina Dorsal. Poemia by Cristina Gutiérrez Mar. In a playful and joyful way with a language game, this work takes us on a sensual and poetic journey that invite us to redefine the meaning of what are reading. And you know this book, La hélice en rojo de mi corazón gravita, The Red Helix of My Heart Gravitates by Melissa Niño. The journey contained in these pages is full of telescopes and all machines as a modern devices to observe the sky. It was inspired by Rosetta, the European Space Agency's mission, and we have the pleasure to hear Melissa here in this meeting, and soon we will know a little bit more of her work. And the last one book of poetry is Aviary by Lisette Sevilla. Through allegories and careful handling of literary figures, the author exposes contemporary problems in Mexico that threaten human rights. Sevilla manages to establish balance between the themes she denounces and the poetic use of Spanish. Her poems also recover lyrical symbols in the country's native languages. And you can see this book cover, which says a lot. And we have a children's poetry book. The name is Poeticuentos de Fábula, Fable Poetic Tales by Aida Sosa. This children's poetry book is a rescue of minor art poetry. It also promotes the use of imagination and play as the most powerful forms of teaching. And in poetic prose, we are in the transition between two literary genres. Cloister or Claustro by Lucero Alanis. With simplicity and clarity, this poetic diary told by a girl places us in a kind of confession. The cloister is not paradise. It is the island of desire that disturbs us. The facts are bloody, but Alanis presents them from the beauty of poetic prose. And in short story, as I told you, we have 2 options. La Señora Rodríguez y Otros Mundos by Marta Cerda, Mrs. Rodríguez and Other Worlds. In this book, every story, every narratable world fits into concise prose, like in a bag. Mrs. Rodríguez's bag is an extension of herself. It is her identity. Breaking down its contents is synonymous with revealing her inner being. And Mother on Fire, Madre en Llamas by Krista Aoun. With naturalness and impeccable narrative tension, this work gives voice and lives to different characters. The stories reveal the deep imprint that a mother's actions cause, as well as those with whom she lives. And our last book is a novel written by Cecilia Magaña, Demasiado tarde para hacer otra cosa, Too late to be anything else. A novel in which women take control of everything until the ultimate consequences. It is the story of the unlikely bond that arises between two women with nothing to lose and nothing to prove to themselves. And this is our proposal of excellent books we want to share with you. And thanks for letting us invite you to know her works.
All right, thank you so much for that, Ruth. Now I had questions for you, but I'm going to not ask those questions now because I think we're running a little bit over time. So what I would like to do now is go to Zoe in Australia, to talk about the next portion of this, and then we'll invite everybody back, so that you can all ask your questions. And we might actually wrap up. Otherwise, I know we can all be here for hours and hours because this is so much fun. So it's a great pleasure now to introduce Zoe Rodriguez. She is currently the chair of PEN International's Women's Writers Committee. She has been very instrumental in advocating and pushing for Know Her Words. And I believe it was your idea from the start that we should actually have something like this. Zoe has spent her career working on policy initiatives to support Australian artists in the visual and publishing industries. She is a trained lawyer. There are an awful lot of lawyers in this gathering today. And she managed the Copyright Agency's Cultural Fund from 2018 to 2017 to provide support for a variety of projects, including practical training and workshops for emerging artists, mid-career creators, and prizes for authors and artists. She's also actively works on IP and copyright laws and policies for writers, publishers, and visual artists. In 2019, Zoe became the director of Art Bank, which is an initiative by the Australian government to provide support to the contemporary arts sector. So it's a great pleasure. Zoe, it's wonderful to have you here, and I'm so pleased you've made it. Okay.
Thank you very much.
So, would you like to tell us a little bit about Know Her Words and where it came from and why it happened?
Yes. So firstly, as an Australian, I'd like to acknowledge that today I'm coming from the land of the Wurundjeri people of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. They are the first people of this land, are the oldest storytellers. They've been telling stories for 60,000 years. Why Know Her Words? Well, let's go back to the beginning of why the Women Writers Committee. In 1986, PEN International held a congress in New York. The person coordinating it was a certain Norman Mailer, and when asked by a number of women, why no women are given voice at this congress? Why are all the featured authors men, except for one notable exception? He said, because none of them are good enough. None of them have anything worth saying to us. So that was the reason that the PEN International Women Writers Committee came about. You can imagine the anger of excellent women writers from around the world who were gathered at that Congress in 1986. It took a few years for it to formalise, but it's been going strong since. Then we had our first women woman president of PEN International, Jennifer Clement. With her in 2017, the PEN movement adopted the Women's Manifesto. And that manifesto was a charter for our particular committee and for the PEN movement to say women must not be silenced, whether it's through physical risk, censorship, harassment. Fine. We thought, what can we do to activate that manifesto? And our first attempt, looking at the underrepresentation of women in the literary celebration of different countries and the profile that comes with it, we decided on a path called the Vida Count, which is to run a survey and to measure how many women's books was our thing, how many women's books in each country are selected for shortlisting for major prizes that change their profiles and lead to sales and prominence. How many of those go on to win those prizes? We tried that, and in Australia it was interesting. After a number of years of no women writers being shortlisted, we'd set up a separate thing called the Stella Count, and we've had a strong number of women now shortlisted and winning prizes. Holding editors, judges, people to account is important. But what we learned at PEN International through the Women Writers Committee was that perhaps our membership wasn't that interested in counting literary prizes. That can become fiddly very quickly. And it's about numbers. They're very important. That data is important, and making people reflect on those is important. But I then thought back to a young woman from Africa who had attended the PEN Congress in Pune. And we were talking about what could we do as a committee, what were useful things. And she said, my country doesn't publish women writers. I'd like to learn about the best women's writing from your countries, because it could be an example for me, for children in my country. Anyway, that idea was burbling along in the back of my brain for a long time. When I realised the Vida Count was important, but maybe not something that would be led by centres in such a way, I thought, we're people of narrative, we're people of storytelling. Perhaps a better thing is to celebrate the best women's writing from around the world, and to challenge our centres, say, come up with the best 10. And it's just a start. It's not a closed set. This is going to be built on, but so that we can learn about each other's cultures, so that we can give prominence to the writing of our women writers. That's a bit of the background. The name was me reflecting on the very significant visual arts exhibition that took place in Australia at our National Gallery called Know Her Name. Know Her Name. And that was in the wake of the Me Too movement. And it was celebrating great Australian women artists, and I don't think we'd done that properly before. And then I thought, oh, Know Her Name, that's good. What could we do for PEN? And I thought, Know Her Words. So it was sort of a challenge, a celebration, and that's how I came up with the name for our program. So
okay, awesome. That is awesome. Because just doing, I really hope that everyone who's attending today, in the course of actually researching this for this event, I've gone and explored now. I now actually know people in PEN Guadalajara. I've now gone and looked at their work. I'm now reading I've gone through their list. I've managed to find translations of their work. And I'm doing the same with the Australian list, though translation is not an issue there. So 14 PEN centers have come up with their Know Her Word list. I think Sandee will post the link up for everyone to go and check that out. But have you got any advice for centers that are still struggling to come up with their list?
Well, I think you've got to start. So for PEN Sydney, because I was trying to get this idea off the ground and I wanted to show people what would this look like, I very undemocratically selected the 10 works that are on the PEN Sydney list. I'm an English literature graduate, and particularly of Australian literature. So I felt that I had some ability, and I'd worked at the Copyright Agency and set up a program called Reading Australia, all about Australian literature. So I greedily made my choices, and I thought these are the things I think talk about women in Australia in different phases. One of the really important elements, I think, for any list is that it is a reflection of the community. In Australia, that meant it had to include First Nations voices, that they are absolutely significant, and in the literary world of Australia, of increasing significance. But it comes back to what a number of speakers have talked about, a post-colonial country grappling with that part of our identity, along with writers like Shankari and our immigrant populations. These are, again, stories that are very central to Australia now, and they are growing in prominence. So for me, it is about looking for diversity within the women writers of the country or the territory you're covering. Our next list, and I think the Women Writers Committee has decided the next iteration will be looking for children's books in particular. But it should be developed by a group from the centre who know enough about writing and writers to select cleverly. In Australia, we have 3 centres. I hope it's something we'll be able to do cooperatively. It's difficult to narrow down such a rich field. That first list for PEN Sydney, for me, I wanted to include different forms. So there's a novella, there are 5 novels, there's 2 poetry collections, there's a short story collection, there's a children's book. Again, that was to reflect some of the diversity of the Australian women's writing.
Right. Okay. Awesome. Well, so you've kind of also touched on what you would like to see happen with No Her Words. It's not definitive. How do you get? Do you plan to get readers involved? Because we can't write without readers.
Absolutely.
Right? So I think it's very important to have those reading circles.
Yes, and this is where it's wonderful to be part of a group. I came up with an original idea about, we'll come up with lists of works. That Women Writers Committee, and particularly Judith Hill, said, how do we activate this? How do we make this come alive so that it's not just a list of books, but we're actually doing something? And reading groups between centres, us celebrating this at the Women Writers Committee meetings. We always have a meeting around International Women's Day on the 8th of March. We have a meeting around Congress, but saying, how do we do this? How do we create book groups and discussions and learn about each other's writing, and great writers learn about each other? So,
well, I think we've done it in a sense today, Zoe, because we're on 4 continents. We've got readers and writers from around the world. So I think this is probably a very, very good start.
And I want to thank you very much. I was so delighted when I saw this initiative. I thought, oh, No Her Words is getting legs. This is great. So.
Yeah. So, okay. And on that note, we've got a little bit of time for questions, not very much. So I would like to invite all the writers and all the speakers back on air. And if you have any questions, could you please type them up for us so that we probably have about 5-7 minutes for questions. We started a little bit late, so we're running a little bit late. And so if we've got questions, we can go with that. So would anyone like to have their questions up? If no one's got a question, I'm going to put my question to everybody because I think it's relevant. Anne, are you here? Anne's not here.
I'm here.
You're here. Okay. You're not on my screen. Okay. My question is, are there particular challenges? I know historically, there's been tremendous bias against women. Women cannot think, women cannot write, women are not profound enough, women are not clever enough, women don't get opportunity enough, women are bogged down in all kinds of funny things. Therefore, they cannot write, let alone having the headspace to actually write. Has the world changed so much that we're in a better place? Are we, where are we with all of that? Anybody want to take this away? Because you're all very accomplished, you're all very busy, you all do juggling multiple things at multiple times, and you're still all producing incredible work. So is there, so when you, do you feel you're held back? And how do we push women's literature forward?
I'll give this one a kind of preliminary shot because I did a book event yesterday. I was talking about something a bit related. I think one of the challenges is, as you've said, that writing and art takes time, and it takes time to get good enough to share your work with other people. And then it takes time to create it. So there's a long kind of training process for any artist. And that time is essentially kind of in a selfish pursuit. And for many years, you might not have something that you can present to your friends and family in the world as the product of all that time. And I think the fact is that historically and still in the present moment, women's time is often massively devalued, or rather it's not devalued in the sense that it's very valuable, but because it's very economically valuable, it's very important that women do not take that time for themselves. It's important that women run households. They devote that time to childcare. They do all this labor that is essentially invisible but fundamental to the kind of running of society. Um, and and as a result, that I think that's one of the kind of huge kind of retarding factors for women's art and creativity. One thing that really strikes me, a lot of my favorite female authors, you can really see their careers take off and their productivity take off after the kids go to school. And in a way, it's quite a good job being a writer, in that there's a certain flexibility in that you can kind of do it in the interstices of running a household and raising the kids and so on. But that does require the kids to be kind of somewhere else. Like if they're on you the whole time and they're quite young, then you can't do anything about that really. That's very demanding. So that does strike me because I'm lucky enough to be in a kind of household where my partner is the primary caregiver. But we both work essentially full time or slightly more than full time. And I think it always strikes me how that kind of really essential labor of doing the dishes, working out where washing the laundry, cooking the food, raising the children, like how visible that becomes when it's a man doing it. And how when it's a man doing it, it becomes because I know as well several full-time male authors who are very involved in raising their children. They might be the primary caregiver, but in that case, they always get childcare. There's always a formalized, the kid goes to nursery, the kid goes to a babysitter. And that's just not the case with many of the women writers I know, when they're the primary caregiver. There doesn't seem to be a consideration that they might like 3 days a week to just think about their work and have a chance to get the words out. It's just assumed that, oh, you'll sort of get it done with the baby sleeping or something.
Thank you, Zen. I'm just going to weigh in. Thank you for going first on that one, because I think it's a hugely fraught and ongoing question. Not the bigger picture of women's labor, the fact that it's invisible, that it's therefore undervalued. It's often non-economic labor, so it's undervalued, but essential labor nonetheless. And that art within that is even lower down on the hierarchy until it becomes remunerated. And the average writer in Australia earns less than $18,000. So we're not doing this to make the living wage here, people. We are, it's I'm only just starting to be taxed on my literary income, if I can put it that way. So for me, just speaking to my own journey, I have had to, and am still at the age of 50, retraining myself to, and I don't want to say that I'm retraining myself to think like a man. Now, male authors never get asked that question, Zen. How do you do it all? Right? How do you write and have a career? In all the male panels I've attended, no male writer has ever been asked that question, but almost every female writer is asked that question. So we're still assuming a certain gender norms, right? It is an ongoing journey for me to value my own storytelling, to value and assert my right to write, to really to own that everything that I do. So I'm teaching myself, right? I'm teaching myself and trying to unlearn a lot of culturally based gender norms and teach myself how to say, I'm working. When I'm doing the laundry, I'm working. When I'm making the planet better, I'm working. When I'm redrafting laws, I'm working. When I'm telling stories for money or not money, I'm working. And when I'm raising you 4 children to be responsible citizens in a global community, I am working. So, and I'm trying to change the language, in particular because I have 3 sons and 1 daughter. She knows all this already. And I'm trying to take those 3 boys on a journey so that, should they have female partners in the future, their female partners don't hate me and send them back. Enough for me.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much. Does anyone else have anyone to add, or can I move on to another question?
Actually, I was about to do both things. Take upon this labor and right to writing discussion that Sen and Shankari started, and take it on to Mari. Oh, I didn't get the chat moved backwards. But there's a question in the chat about how tips. Asking for tips on how to juggle writing and working, and listening now to both of you. I don't know if I would like to have a full-time job as a writer in the first place. I mean, I studied literature, and I felt like a grinding made machine, with all these readings that they would give us throughout a single week. I mean, read 5 literary books on a single week. I mean, that's becoming professional, and that a bit took away the joy of literature in me. Because it was starting to become only professional. So my tip here will be just go writing. If you are sweeping, if you are, I don't know, cleaning the windows, if you are feeding your baby, if you are doing the laundry, I mean, writing starts in our minds, right? And we get these maybe I'm here speaking as a poet. It's easier, to bring down a poem, and I'm going to put this into quotation marks, but we manage a smaller our literary pieces are smaller. We are not writing a novel, but yet you always find these ideas, these I don't know, solutions. I mean, just I would try to set my mindset away a little bit from the collide that we have historically put upon this, because I mean, writing is not only intellectual. We do it with our full bodies. That's why I would really remark or stress this part. Don't wait until you are off work, or that I mean, to be retired to write. Just do it. I mean, I did it for 10 years. I worked and wrote, so we can do it. Yeah.
Yeah, lovely. Thank you so much. I'm going to now bring this discussion back to the vernacular. Zen, I think you raised this when you were I think before you published Blackwater Sister, where you talked about whether we need to have glossaries for words in the vernacular. I noticed, Shankari, in your novel as well, it's very interwoven, and there are no italics that alert you to, terms of endearment or all that. It's very seamless. But what kind of pushback is there to the vernacular from the publishing industries and, acceptance from readers on the whole?
I take this one first.
Yeah.
So I think, Sheena, you're talking about a Facebook post I made
Yes.
before Blackwater Sister was published, and I asked Malaysians specifically what they thought about using Malay and all these other languages in the English that we use in our books, and whether people thought that should be glossed, how they felt about glossaries, how they felt about footnotes explaining and translating, and so on. And the specific reason for that actually is I turned in my manuscript for Blackwater Sister, and my US editor had come back. And to be fair to the publishers, almost all the editors I've worked with, although almost all of them have been white or American or both, there have been a lot of discussions about, not italicizing kind of quote unquote foreign words, not and why people might choose to write and draw in other languages without necessarily glossing that or explaining what the words mean, and hoping people and expecting readers to pick up on it via context, clues. And so they were not oppressive about it, but my editor did say, you do use a lot of non-English. I mean, I don't think it's a lot of non-English by my standards, but it's probably less than Jane Eyre, which where Charlotte Bronte happily puts whole passages in French, because if you were educated that time, you're kind of expected to understand, right? And I would be sitting in Malaysia as this kind of kid who didn't speak French, being like, what are they saying? But I did use non-English words, and my US editor said, some readers are going to find this off-putting, so this is up to you, but you might want to consider providing a glossary or so on. And almost all the examples of internationally published Malaysian fiction in English do something like that. So they either do a glossary or so this applies to Singaporean as well. I think Crazy Rich Asians does footnotes explaining, and then the one that actually I kind of dislike the most is the one where the strategy is where you when you use a foreign non-English word, you then immediately explain what it is in the sentence. So you like say nasi lemak, and then you say comma coconut rice, served with blah blah blah, which I loathe, because I think it breaks the suspension of disbelief. It breaks the narrative flow, and so that's why I surveyed Malaysians, because I wanted to know what people thought. Like, I knew what I thought, but I wanted to know what people thought. And I was pleased. Maybe I had a kind of biased sample, but quite a lot of people came back and kind of reinforced my prejudices. And they said, look, we grew up reading, Enid Blyton. She never explained what a tongue sandwich was, or ginger beer, or all these kind of foreign things. So why should we explain what serai is, or whatever? People can kind of pick it up from context. But what that whole discussion made me realize is that when you're from a very dominant culture, say like white Americans who speak English, you actually, when you read a book, you expect to understand easily every word on the page. You expect that to be with it made clear to you and legible to you. And I don't think, if you're reading from a more marginal position, that you necessarily have this expectation. I don't expect to understand every reference in a novel that I read. Like, actually, I have the assumption that some of it's going to be opaque to me, but I kind of figure, oh, understand enough, to kind of like get something out of the work.
Yeah. Anyone else want to jump in on that?
I just said that I'd agree with all of that, Zen. And I think that your last point there, it's an interesting sense of entitlement when you're from the dominant culture, that you expect that you're entitled to understand every word. But when you're reading from a marginal position, the approach is different. And that's a really great observation. I would say that over my 5 novels, by in January I'm publishing my 5th novel, I've gone from the first edition of my first novel had a detailed glossary, detailed timeline of Sri Lankan history, to progressively less to nothing. Because I've grown more confident in exactly what you say, Zen, that we read English literature and we're expected to know whatever everything is. And I want the world to work a little bit harder. I'll give you context and you can work it out. And if you don't work it out, then just keep going. What I do, the one caveat to this I will say is that my writing often operates in the space of art as advocacy and activism. And sometimes quite deliberately so. And in those cases, there are times when I am trying to create connection and understanding of a particular injustice. And therefore, I will think about providing more context than I might ordinarily have needed for my first stakeholder group, which would be my own people, because they need no explanation at all, right? This is our experience. So that's the one question I ask myself at the end in the final editing process.
Yeah. Technology as well, I think, has played a major role in this. If you're reading something on an ebook, you've got an automatic translator. You click on the word, a translation comes up. You can Google certain things. I think we probably are going to get to a point where I haven't seen it in ebooks so far, where things are going to be in HTML, which you can click on, it will take you to the relevant Wikipedia page. That sort of thing. So I think technology also has had a lot of, has had a part to play in making language more universal and more accessible. I remember my father sort of as a child, having to read about shepherdesses and chimney sweeps. And this was back in the 1950s or, thereabouts. And he had no clue what a chimney sweep, he'd never seen a chimney, didn't know what it was, couldn't understand why it needed sweeping. But, nonetheless, there were shepherdesses and chimney sweeps, and he, somehow had to deal with it without the benefit of any of the technology that we have today. Okay, so I think we are past time. So I'm just going to say last words from anybody on anything. Anything you want to say to readers, to writers?
I'd just like to say again, thank you for embracing this idea. Thank you, of course, writers, for writing the works that we're going to enjoy, but thank you for embracing the idea of Know Her Words. Okay, thank you, Zoe. I would like to thank all our speakers, Melissa, Shankari, Zoe, Zen, the presenter, Ruth, and of course, who I for some reason cannot see on my screen, Sandee, for the most amazing work that she's done in the background as our floor manager and tech person today, and Hana and Nadira, Nadira for holding up, Hana, who was responsible for much of the organizing of all of this, and of course, Adriana, who has been plowing away in the other room, translating into Spanish simultaneously, and I don't know how she does it, but awesome work, Adriana. And on behalf of PEN Malaysia, we'd like to thank you all for joining us today, whether it's morning, night, have a good rest of whatever you're having. Yes, thank you, and we're signing off from PEN Malaysia. Thank you for joining us. Okay, bye-bye.